You're scrolling through social media at 2 in the morning, watching your friends post about their latest vacation to Europe, their brand new Tesla, or their downtown apartment with floor to ceiling windows. Meanwhile, you're sitting wondering how everyone else seems to have their financial life figured out while you're calculating whether you can afford both groceries and gas this week. Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you that most of those people posting about their amazing lifestyle are actually drowning in debt, living paycheck to paycheck, and have less than $500 in their savings account? The financial reality of the average American is absolutely shocking, and I guarantee some of these numbers are going to completely change how you think about money in this country. If you've ever wondered where you actually stand compared to everyone else, or if you want to understand the real financial picture of America that nobody talks about, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if these statistics end up surprising you as much as they surprised me. Before we dive into these eye-opening numbers, let me ask you something. When you think about the average American's financial situation, what comes to mind? Maybe you picture someone who's steadily building wealth, contributing to their retirement account, and preparing for a comfortable future. Or perhaps you imagine someone who's basically making ends meet, but generally has their act together. The truth is, most of us have absolutely no idea what normal actually looks like when it comes to money. We make assumptions based on what we see around us, but the reality is often dramatically different from what we imagine. Here's the thing that makes this whole topic so important. Understanding these numbers isn't just about satisfying your curiosity or making yourself feel better about your own situation. It's about giving you the information you need to make better decisions with your money. Think about it this way. If you're trying to get in better shape, wouldn't you want to know what the average person weighs or how much they exercise? If you're trying to improve your career, wouldn't you want to know how your skills compare to other people in your field? Money works exactly the same way. When you understand where you stand compared to everyone else, you can make more informed choices about your spending, saving, and investing. So let's start with something that affects every single working person in America: income. When you cash that paycheck every 2 weeks, are you earning more or less than the typical worker? According to the most recent data from the U.S. Census Bureau, the median household income in America was $83,730 in 2024. Now, let me break that down because there's some fascinating stuff hiding in these numbers. We're talking about household income here, not individual income, which means this could include a spouse or other family members who might be working. And when we say median, that means half of all households earn more than this amount, and half earn less. It's the middle of the pack. But here's where things get really interesting and honestly a bit concerning. The average household income was actually $121,000, which is significantly higher than that median figure. Why the big difference? Because the average gets pulled up by a small number of extremely high earners, while the median gives us a clearer picture of what most families are actually dealing with. This tells us that income inequality is more severe than most people realize. The geographic differences in income are absolutely staggering. If you're living in Massachusetts, the median household income was $113,900 in 2024. But if you're in Mississippi, you're looking at roughly half that amount, around $55,980. That's not just a small difference. That's a completely different standard of living, based purely on where you happen to live. The gender wage gap continues to be a major issue, and it's actually getting worse in some ways. Between 2023 and 2024, full-time male workers saw their wages grow by 3.7%. Workers saw, just while female, a 1.5% increase. This disparity becomes even more pronounced when we look at racial. While demographics, median incomes rose 5% for Hispanic and Asian households. Between 2023 and 2024, Black households actually saw their earnings decline by 3.3%. Now, let's talk about something that will probably shock you even more than those income numbers. Savings. How much money do you think the average American has sitting in their bank account? According to recent survey data, 71% of Americans have $5,000 or less in savings. Let me repeat that because it's so important. 71% of Americans have $5,000 or less saved up. But it gets even more alarming. 41% say they have $500 or less in savings. But wait, it gets worse. 42% of Americans have no personal savings at all. $0. Nothing. They are literally one unexpected expense away from financial disaster. The Federal Reserve data shows that while the average balance in checking, savings, and other transaction accounts was $62,500 in 2022, the median balance was only $8,000. This massive difference between the average and median tells us that a small number of wealthy people are skewing the numbers upward, while most Americans are sitting on much smaller amounts. When we look at emergency savings specifically, the picture becomes even more concerning. Only 54% of adults have 3 months of emergency savings, while 27% of U.S. adults have no emergency savings whatsoever. This is the highest financial vulnerability level of ever recorded by Bankrate, exposing a sharp rise in financial fragility across the entire country. Perhaps most shocking of all, 50% of Americans are unable to cover a $1,000 emergency expense using their savings. Think about that for a moment. A simple car repair, a medical bill, or a broken appliance could completely derail the finances of more than half the population. These statistics reveal something that most people don't want to admit. The majority of Americans are living on an incredibly thin financial edge. That friend posting pictures from their weekend getaway might be putting it all on credit cards. That coworker who always seems to have the latest gadgets might be drowning in debt. The neighbor with the perfectly manicured lawn and the luxury car in the driveway might have less than $500 in their bank account. This financial fragility isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It has real consequences for people's daily lives, their stress levels, their health, and their ability to make good long-term decisions. When you're constantly worried about money, when every unexpected expense feels like a potential catastrophe, it becomes incredibly difficult to think strategically about building wealth or improving your situation. The most disturbing part about these savings statistics is what they reveal about financial preparedness and are talking about America. We country where the vast majority of people are completely unprepared for even minor financial emergencies. This isn't about buying luxury items or taking expensive vacations. This is about basic financial survival, and most Americans are failing at it. But here's what makes these numbers even more shocking. This isn't a problem that only affects low-income households. Even among people earning decent salaries, the savings rates are surprisingly low. The issue isn't necessarily that people don't earn enough money. The issue is that most people have never learned how to manage money effectively, and our culture actively encourages spending over saving. When we shift our focus to debt, the financial picture of the average American becomes even more disturbing. The total personal debt in the United States has reached an all-time high of $17.5 trillion. Let me put that number in perspective for you. That's more money than the entire gross domestic product of most countries. The average American adult is carrying $66,772 in debt. That's not just mortgage debt, which you might expect. That's credit cards, student loans, car payments, personal loans, and everything else combined. But here's where things get really ugly. Credit card debt alone tells a horrifying story about how Americans handle money. By the end of 2024, Americans owed $1.18 trillion on credit cards. That's trillion with a T. 8 out of 10 adults have at least one credit card, and 48% of them carry a balance from month to month, meaning they're paying interest on purchases they made months or even years ago. The average credit card debt per person is $6,501. Think about what this means in practical terms. If you're carrying $6,500 in credit card debt at 20% interest, which is pretty typical, you're throwing away $1,300 per year just in interest payments. That's money that could be going toward building wealth, but instead, It's making credit card companies rich, and that assumes you're not adding any new debt to the pile. Student loan debt represents another massive burden crushing American families. The total student loan debt in this country is $1.774 trillion. The average student loan debt per borrower is about $38,792. But here's what's really insane about student loan debt. Unlike almost every other type of debt, you generally can't discharge it in bankruptcy. You're stuck with it until you pay it off, no matter what happens to your financial situation. The psychological impact of carrying all this debt goes far beyond just the monthly payments. When you're drowning in debt, every financial decision becomes a source of stress. You can't take risks with your career because you need that steady paycheck to service your debt. You can't invest money because every spare dollar goes toward minimum payments. You can't build an emergency fund because there's nothing left over after you pay your bills. Mortgage debt dominates the landscape with $12.594 trillion in total. Mortgage debt nationwide, the average mortgage debt per account is $147,163. Now, mortgage debt is different from credit card debt because you're actually buying an asset that typically appreciates in value over time. But even mortgage debt can become problematic when people stretch themselves too thin to afford houses they really can't handle. What makes the debt situation even more concerning is how it interacts with those savings numbers we talked about earlier. When you're carrying significant debt, especially high-interest debt like credit cards, it becomes almost impossible to build savings. You might manage to save a few $100s, but then an unexpected expense comes up and you have to put it on a credit card, adding to your debt load. It's a vicious cycle that keeps millions of Americans trapped in financial mediocrity. The debt-to-income ratios across the country paint a picture of people who are leveraged to the hilt. Many Americans are spending 40, 50, even 60% of their income just on debt payments. When you factor in housing costs, which we'll get to in a moment, many people have almost nothing left over for savings, investing, or even basic discretionary spending. Here's something that will probably surprise you about American spending habits. The average monthly expenses for a household in 2023 were $6,440. That works out to $77,280 per year in total spending. For single individuals, the financial burden is substantial, with the average person spending about $4,641 per month, according to the most recent Consumer Expenditure Survey. Housing represents by far the largest expense category for Americans. Monthly housing expenses in 2023 averaged $2,120, which represents a 5% increase from the previous year. Of that $2,120, $1,292 goes toward housing payments like mortgage or rent. That's over $15,000 per year just to keep a roof over your head, and if you're living or probably in a major city, you laughing at how low that number sounds. Transportation costs add another massive burden to American budgets. Americans spent $1,098 per month on transportation in 2023, or $13,174 over the full year. Transportation is the second largest monthly expenditure for most families. This spending was up 7% compared to the previous year, largely due to rising gas prices and increased vehicle costs. Food expenses continue to climb, putting additional pressure on household budgets. Americans are spending significant portions of their income just to feed their families, and with inflation continuing to impact grocery prices, this burden is only getting heavier. The rising cost of basic necessities means that families have less discretionary income available for savings or investment. The impact of inflation has made these expenses even more challenging for the average American family. The annual inflation rate was 2.5% as of the end of August 2024, but certain categories like housing saw much higher increases. Shelter costs were up 5.2%, while the cost of food increased by 2.1%. These numbers might not sound dramatic, but when you're already stretching every dollar, Even small percentage increases can have a significant impact on your ability to make ends meet. Rent costs have become particularly burdensome for many Americans. The average monthly rent bill rose to $2,009 in October 2024, up from $1,945 one year earlier. For many people, especially younger Americans and those in major cities, rent alone is consuming 30, 40, or even 50% of their total income. The financial strain is evident in how Americans manage their budgets on a day-to-day basis. The reality is that the average American lives paycheck to paycheck, with little to no financial buffer between them and potential disaster. This isn't necessarily because they're irresponsible or making poor choices. In many cases, it's simply because the cost of basic living expenses has outpaced income growth for most workers. When you combine high expenses with low savings rates and significant debt loads, you get a population that's incredibly vulnerable to economic shocks. A job loss, a medical emergency, or even a major car repair can completely destabilize a family's finances. This vulnerability isn't just a personal problem. It's a systemic issue that affects the entire economy, because consumers who are financially stressed can't drive economic growth through spending. The spending patterns of Americans also reveal some interesting insights about financial priorities and decision-making. Many people are spending money on things that provide immediate gratification while neglecting long-term financial security. This isn't necessarily because they don't understand the importance of saving and investing. Often, it's because they feel like they're already stretched so thin that there's no room in their budget for long-term planning. The retirement savings crisis in America reveals perhaps the most devastating long-term financial reality facing working families today. When we examine how much money Americans have actually saved for their golden years, the numbers are absolutely terrifying. For baby boomers who are either already retired or approaching retirement, the average 401k balance is $249,300. Now, that might sound like a decent chunk of change, but let's put this in perspective. If you follow the traditional 4% withdrawal rule, that amount would generate less than $10,000 per year in retirement income. $10,000 per year. That's less than $850 per month to live on after a lifetime of work. The situation gets progressively worse as we look at younger generations. Generation X workers, who should be in their peak earning and saving years, have an average 401k balance of $192,300. Their average IRA balance sits at $103,952. These are people in their 40s and 50s who have maybe 15 to 20 years left to save for retirement, and they're nowhere near where they need to be to maintain their current lifestyle once they stop working. Millennials face an even more challenging situation with an average 401k balance of just $67,300 and an average IRA balance of $25,109. Remember, these are people who are supposed they're primed to be in saving years, building the foundation for their financial future. Instead, many of them are still paying off student loans, struggling with housing costs, and trying to raise families on wages that haven't kept pace with the cost of living. Generation Z workers are just getting started, but their numbers are already concerning. The average 401k balance for this group is $13,500, while their average IRA balance is a mere $6,672. Now, to be fair, many of these workers are just beginning their careers, but they're also facing economic challenges that previous generations never had to deal with, including higher education costs, more expensive housing, and a job market that offers less security than what their parents experienced. Perhaps the most shocking statistic about retirement preparedness is this: 63% of Americans have less than $50,000 saved for retirement. Let me repeat that because it's so important. Nearly 2 out of every 3 Americans have less than $50,000 set aside for their entire retirement. Even more alarming, 37% have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. These aren't just young people who haven't had time to save. This includes people in their 40s, 50s, and even 6 approaching retirement age with rapidly ties who are almost nothing saved. The disconnect between what people think they need for retirement and what they actually have saved is staggering. Americans believe they need $1.26 million to retire comfortably, according to recent surveys. While that's actually down from the $1.46 million figure from the previous year, it's still a far cry from what most people have actually managed to accumulate. The median retirement savings for people age 55 to 64 is $185,000. For those age 65 to 74, it's $200,000. Both figures are dramatically lower than that $1.26 million target that people say they need. The reality is that only 35% of Americans feel on track for retirement, and that percentage has been declining over time. Even among older age groups who should theoretically be better prepared, only 42% of those aged 45 to 59 and 50% of those 60 and over feel prepared for retirement. This means that even people who are within a decade or two of retirement age don't feel confident about their financial readiness. One of the most disturbing aspects of the retirement crisis is that 36% of Americans don't have any retirement savings at all. Not a single dollar set aside for when they stop entirely's economy, and you today living on 15 Social Security benefitate, the wealth working. These year or understand $50 per month in some around 18 of the most shocking $1,600, assuming $50 per month. Trial quickly, 100 is completely about 15, it on Social Security, America Present still available when they retire inequality approach. The averaged why this is currently to rely statistics in a deck and per people are planning disparities in the developed world, revealing a financial system that has become increasingly concentrated among the wealthiest Americans. In 2024, the top 10% of workers owned 67% of the country's total wealth. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of workers own just 2.5% of all wealth. This isn't just inequality. This is extreme concentration that has reached levels not seen since the Gilded Age. The numbers become even more staggering when we look at the very top of the wealth pyramid. To enter the Forbes 400 list of wealthiest Americans in 2024, you needed a net worth of at least $3.3 billion. The average member of this exclusive club held a net worth of over $13 billion, which is nearly 18 times the 1982 average after adjusting for inflation. We're talking about levels of wealth accumulation that are almost impossible for most people to comprehend. The bottom half of Americans face a particularly dire situation that has been getting worse over time. This group held just 2.4% of U.S. wealth in 2024, down from 3.5% in 1990. At one point in 2011, their share hit an all-time low of just 0.4% of the nation's total net worth. Since 2022, the bottom 50% has experienced a steady decline in their share of wealth, meaning that inequality is actually accelerating rather than improving. Stock ownership demonstrates this inequality in stark terms that affect retirement planning and wealth building for millions of Americans. The top 1% of households controlled nearly half, 49.9%, of all equities and mutual fund shares in 2024. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% held only 1% of all stocks and mutual funds. This means the stock market performs well, the benefits flow almost entirely to people who are already wealthy, while average Americans see little to no benefit from market gains. The billionaire class has experienced unprecedented wealth growth that puts their gains in perspective against the struggles of average Americans. Their combined wealth increased by more than $1.3 trillion, or 193%, between March of 2020 and December of 2024. To understand how dramatic this is, consider that the entire savings crisis we discussed earlier involves Americans struggling to save even small amounts, while billionaires added more wealth in less than 5 years than most people will see in multiple lifetimes. This wealth concentration has profound implications that far beyond economics extend into the realm of political influence and democratic governance. 100 billionaire families spent $2.6 billion on political contributions, 16 in 2024, representing an and 0.5% of all political contributions. Contrast, back in 2000, billionaire election spending was just $18 million, or 0.6% of total political contributions. This means that the wealthiest Americans have dramatically increased their political influence at the same time their wealth has become more concentrated. So there you have it. The financial reality of the average American is nothing like what most people imagine. And it's probably nothing like what you see portrayed on social media. 71% of people have less than $5,000 saved, 42% have no savings at all, and the average person is carrying over $66,000 in debt. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they represent millions of families who are one emergency away from financial disaster. Understanding where you actually stand compared to everyone else is the first step toward making better financial decisions and breaking free from the cycle that keeps most Americans financially trapped.